Hey, welcome to Implementing Equipping Minds in the Classroom 2023. So I cannot wait to see how we are going to flesh all this out the next couple days. It was something I was not anticipating years ago on this journey. And I was talking to Victoria Harris yesterday, who you're going to get to hear from because Victoria has been implementing Equipping Minds in her school for 3 years, going into 4, and now they are going to be embedding Equipping Minds throughout the entire day in every subject, rewriting their curriculum. So it's very exciting what they're doing and what that's looking like. But what I want to first address, and we were talking about this, is why in the world even do Equipping Minds? Why? And you have to answer that question. And y'all, it took me 16 years to get the answer to that question, okay? Because as many of y'all know, when Clayton was born, it was a medical emergency. We almost lost him. God breathed for that baby and sustained his life. But those extremities were blue for 13 hours. And so we knew that there were going to be some delays. And so working with his occupational therapist and speech therapist for years and years, and being in the room or in the observation room, doing 100 hours of Lindenmood Bell. He was finally reading, but everything was still very slow and very laborious. But during that, I just kept doing the traditional things. This is what was out there. These are the therapies that were out there. And still we got to that point when he was 16 that he said, I can't process it as fast as it's coming at me. And so I had to pull him out of the private classical school that I was headmaster, and I hired someone to homeschool him the rest of the year. And I just couldn't see his joy of learning disappear. And he was getting depressed, frustrated, and that was just not a good place. However, when everything was presented at his pace, he did great. He was fine. And that's when, even though we had had his psychological done, a full neuropsych done when he was 10, it took me 6 years from 10 to 16 to pull that back out and say, what is in the way? What's interfering? We've done everything. We've paid tens of thousands of dollars. He's working so hard. We have great curriculums. We have great teachers. It's multisensory. I mean, every brain-based teaching methods, if it could have happened, it was happening. But then I got out that neuropsych and I'm like, this working memory score, it's low, this processing. And he told me, he said, Mom, I cannot process it as fast as it's coming at me. I feel like they throw a Frisbee on one side of the room and I go to grab it and they throw it on the other. And so the processing, the working memory, the holding on to pieces of information, to do something with them, to listen and take notes was not happening. And so when God called me and my husband both to step out of working in private schools, we came to Kentucky and started developing this program. And I really took the lead from that neuropsych and said, what is it saying? It's saying processing, working memory, comprehension, fluid reasoning, visual spatial. And I started researching everything I could find on those things. And you know what I found was that really people were saying IQ couldn't change, processing cannot change, working memory cannot change. It is what it is what I found. Well, if anybody knows me, I don't usually accept those kinds of prognosis. And I was very blessed in 2020 to be at a conference with Dr. Daniel Amen with the Amen clinics. And at that point, he was only out in California. Now they have clinics all over. And but I got to see scans of the brain, people who had post-concussion syndrome or alcoholism or ADHD. And I had seen where the brain had the capacity to change. And I thought, well, if their brains could change, surely Clayton's brain could change. And so that instilled that hope. And so when I started going back to how I saw them test him, I thought, well, if that's how you test it, because we give tests in school all the time, right? Well, aren't there things we do to prepare for the test? Absolutely. But for psychological tests, there's no preparation. Nobody says, well, let's practice our processing before we go in and have your WISC-5. Let's practice your work. No, they just test it, okay, with no preparation. And so you've got, and guess what? If there's no preparation, if there's no intervention, then there's no change. I wish I could tell you that everybody was in agreement with me on this. And what's interesting is you will see a lot out there. There's a lot of computer training programs for cognitive training, a lot of things out there. And I was reading this book that I'm going to show you. It's called Cognitive and Working Memory Training: Perspectives from Psychology, Neuroscience, and Human Development. And I was so excited when I got this book, because I got this book because I was asked to write a chapter for the book School Violence and Primary Prevention, and to talk about equipping minds and cognitive training and the benefits of cognitive training. And so I'm reading the book, and y'all, this, has educators, professors, researchers from all around. It's an Oxford University Press, and training working memory for 100 days, and everything you could ever want to know on neuroscience and perspectives. And throughout the book, I was so excited because they're talking about MBAC training and the Stroop effect and multi-components and multi-domains and multitask switching, which I had been implementing. Because when I read that Dr. Ridley Stroop had put in MBAC, the Stroop effect that we're going to look at, that he put that in back in the 1930s, y'all, over 100 years ago, we're looking at. And he had built on some work of some German professors earlier than that. And so this has been going on. And so I'm like, oh, here it is. Here's more evidence to support my research, that what I found. And so I just kept reading and chapters on working memory training and all of these different things, and music training and cognitive flexibility and the benefits of music training. And I mean, this was so comprehensive. It was amazing. So, I mean, I'm excited. I'm reading the whole book. And I get to the end of the book. Okay. So I've read the whole book. and I'm marking up the book about what people are saying, and that working memory is key for reading. It's key for math. It's key for life skills, even social skills, emotional health. And you're talking about working memory, and they're talking about executive functioning. However, in the epilogue, it says, y'all, I can't make this up. Don't buy the snake oil. So what is that? What? Yes. So I get back here, and it said in summary, in the summary of the whole book. So I go to the very last section, you know, I'll start reading the last pages going forward into the book. Summary. There's a saying in investigative research, follow the evidence. Unfortunately, the evidence now strongly, if not decisively, indicates that working memory training does not transfer to performance on non-trained tasks. That basically means that your working memory training just makes you better at the working memory training, but doesn't impact life, academic, social skills, emotional skills. The critics were right. Working memory training does not lead to long-lasting generalizable improvements in cognitive functioning. We're sure that this conclusion will be disappointing to many readers of this book, okay, as well as to the many individuals who have purchased commercial brain training products. We're sorry to offer such a gloomy outlook on the state of the arts, okay? But you get the idea, right? But right before that, it says this, okay? What might a convincing study look like? Okay, we've looked at everything, but what would a convincing study look like? Taking the above considerations into account, the ideal study is one that uses a double-blind procedure with an active control group. Okay, we had an active control group in my doctoral dissertation. Why? Because I had a great doctoral committee, and two, I had read the meta-analysis that Dr. Charles Hume had done, saying exactly what is in this summary. And I emailed him during my doctoral study, he's over in the UK, and said, what would you be happy with? What would a good study look like? And he said these exact same things. So I followed these, okay? And so, collects multiple measurements of cognitive abilities. And as you all know, we did the Alloway working memory. We did the Kaufman brief intelligence. We looked at verbal, nonverbal IQ. We did the Terra Nova academic testing. So we looked at 9 academic areas. We looked at 13 areas, 13, 9 academic, verbal, nonverbal, IQ composite, working memory in pre and post. Also, it has randomly assigns a large sample. What they want is at least 30. We had 32, and they were randomly assigned. Nobody knew. In the pre-testing, nobody knew who was in the training group and the control group. In our control group, those students got our nemesis. And so that is more academic tutoring, okay? The training group did Equipping Minds for an hour every single day for 7 weeks, 2 students at a time, where the control group did more academic tutoring, okay? Before, and this is in February and March, so they're getting more academics while the other kids are getting pulled out right before the end of the year test. The other thing to keep in mind is the other thing we required was the students had to be at the same school for 2 years. So they had gotten the same interventions for 2 years. Okay, that's very important to keep in mind. because we weren't able to do follow-up, but we were able to say for 2 years, this is what happened in 2015 academically, because that's what people really care about, right? Is the academic test. And then the only difference was for those 7 weeks before the academic test, okay? One group did Equipping Minds. Now they were wearing their sound therapy while they did it. And they also committed to doing 15 minutes of reflex exercises at home. And we did the starfish that we'll go over and the finger exercises when we began. And so we also, the other thing they want to see is that we use strong statistical testing. And so what we did, I hired Dr. Jeff Heath. He's head of statistics at Center College. And he ran all my stats, and we ran what's called a regression analysis. We didn't just do a paired t-test, you know, because that's it doesn't validate it. You have to run what's called a regression analysis. It's a stricter statistical measure that says it was because of Equipping Minds. And so we got those gains. Their IQ scores went up 16 points, verbal, nonverbal, 15, 14 points, and they went up higher on 7 out of their 9 academic areas, even though they were pulled out to not get more academic tutoring, but to do Equipping Minds. So keeping all that in mind, and they made statistically significant gains in reading, spelling, and science. And then when we did the regression, science held on. So it generalized. Now, then what happened when I read this book? What do you think I did? I reached out to every single one of them, okay? I'm like sending emails going, I agree with you. Okay, I agree with you. Guess what? Working memory training alone will not get what you want. Because is that the only thing that's on the WISC-5? No. Processing, comprehension, fluid reasoning. Now, they all overlap, believe me. And so I wrote them and said, hey, I agree with you. When I did my study, we also worked on auditory processing, visual processing, language processing, executive functioning. You know, we did NBAC training, Stroop effect. We used numbers, colors, letters, symbols, sounds, directions, and you know, so, and a few of them got back to me, and I said, and then I went through that checklist and I said, we did this, and they were like, oh, thank you for letting us know. We had no idea. Because you can't, I was never happier to see me not referenced in a book. Okay. I was like, oh, they didn't read my research and say, and dismiss it. No, they didn't know about it. And so, and this came out in 2020, which means it was being written right when mine was coming out in 2018. And so, but part of the reason you are here as a school is because the school started bringing us in. And it was Rose, who the Roses program is named after, who y'all know. Many of y'all have heard her story. I tell it every single time because I thought it was going to be for kids like Clayton, students mostly with an SLD diagnosis, because that represents over 30% of our IEPs out there. And so that's whether it's dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, or not otherwise specified. And so with that, that's where I was surprised when her mom asked me to work with her, and then I'm her intervention. So just like in the research study, I took her remediation place. She had no homework that 4th grade year. during the fall to winter, during those 12 weeks I worked with her. And at 9 weeks, when they redid the MAP testing, and the principal met me at the door and said, "Have you seen the scores?" And I said, "What scores?" And she's like, "The MAP scores." And I'm like, "Well, what did you want to see?" And she said, "A 3 to 5 point gain from fall to winter." And every time I ask somebody who's familiar with MAP, they're like, "Yeah, that's fair. That's fair." And, but Rose went up 20 points in reading. She went up 11 points in math. She went up 16 in science and 17 in language. And y'all, she has Down syndrome. That's not supposed to be happening. She went up higher than anyone in the entire school. She went up higher than anyone in the history of math testing. So when her 4-year case study, because she kept working with Equipping Minds, and we kept her 4 years doing hers. It was first published in the Christian Education Journal and a special edition on special education in the church, and that's where it was first published. And then it was published in the book Neuroscience and Christian Formation. This is a college textbook that a lot of Christian colleges and seminaries use. And then it was published in my dissertation, and then my dissertation became a book in the Human Disability series on human development. So her 4-year case study is also published there, along with 5 other case studies and along with the research study. And so the other articles that you're going to see here, and right now we've got over 11,000 reads on ResearchGate in just the last, I guess it's been up, 4 years. But the different articles in here that I hope you'll be able to read at some point are naturalistic or biblical worldview of human development. And I think I still haven't found anyone else who has written on that in terms of fleshing it out like this article does. And so I'm going to be fleshing it out a little bit more. I've got another book chapter coming out probably next year in a group collaboration we're doing on John Amos Comenius. So I'm finally going, some of y'all have heard me say for years, I was going to write an article on what Comenius knew about neuroscience. And you may or may not know, John Amos Comenius is the father of education and influenced educational systems around the world. I mean, he is the father of education and developmental psychology, but he had tremendous insight. So I'm super excited. I got to meet somebody who was working on a project, and he heard me, some of y'all heard me at the ACCS conference a couple weeks ago, and he heard that I talked about Comenius, and he said, "You know about Comenius? We're working on a book about how he still influences the world. Would you like to write a chapter?" And I'm like, "Yes, I already have it written in my head. This is a great place to have a voice to share that." So there's also one, though, on computer training or human mediator. And so I talk about how important it is to have a human being working with a student rather than a computer. Okay. We have to be able to look in children's eyes, and they have to be able to see how much we value them. And I love how Dr. Karen Purvis would say it, that when children look into our eyes, they should see their preciousness and their worth. And so being able to come alongside, and because our eyes communicate everything, y'all. Also, there's an article on correlation between working memory, intelligence, and cognitive functions. So why it's not just working memory alone, basically, and cognitive development curriculum increases verbal, nonverbal, and academic abilities. That's the research study. And then there was one that the editor, Dr. Yov Merrick, is head of disabilities for Israel. and he's a visiting professor here at the University of Kentucky. So he had been following my work for about 10 years. So when the research was done and I sent it over to him, he was so sweet. He said, well, I'm going to be the one to publish it. And Carol, there's 4 articles here, not just one. And plus you owe me a case study article. You've been asking me for that. So it's in here. And with autism, post-concussion syndrome, some fetal alcohol syndrome, anxiety are in there as well. And then all those, y'all, this past year, so are now in this book, School Violence and Primary Prevention. So this is the 2nd edition. And I got to add 2 more case studies to it. And a lot of the new handouts that y'all are going to have are in here. So you will, I was able to put these in, and I think I have the longest chapter in the book. He told me when I wrote it, he wasn't going to take anything out. I just kept creating charts for schools. So it's equipping students' minds with a cognitive training program for preventing school violence, because our students with IEPs have a disproportionate rate of being expelled, suspended, bullied, restrained, dropping out, ending up in the juvenile system. It is very much a problem. And so then I understood why he had asked me to contribute to this 2nd edition. So, but why, and y'all, what you need to understand, I didn't take the route to be a college professor to write, to spend my time writing and everything. These are all God going before in the ways that he can. This is a secular college textbook. This is an international medical journal series on human disabilities. This is a Christian education journal. This is a Christian education book. I mean, God has granted favor in all the arenas. Why? Because one thing they made me do in my doctoral work at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary was to follow the science. And because I'm in the field of clinically applied neuroscience, everything that I am going to tell you, I can back up with the research, with the science for not just 10 years, but we're talking, 90, 100 years. And I would even take it back to some things we see in scripture. And as you'll eventually get to read, John Amos Comenius talked about mirror neurons. He called them how our brain images like a mirror reflecting. I mean, but it's mirror neurons. He just didn't know the term neuron yet. He's describing it though, and it's just amazing. So it's all been there. God has just been revealing it and has allowed it to be put together. Okay. So y'all talk about imposter syndrome. I mean, when I started 14 years ago developing this, I thought, well, I'm a mom. But then when Clayton made those gains and I saw that, wait, and some of y'all know, he went on to college. He finished college in 3.5 years on the dean's list. We didn't even think he was going, but it wasn't until we addressed the cognitive skills. Y'all, that was key. All the tutoring we had done, it still didn't help him be able to sit in a class and process the information that was coming at him. And y'all, nobody worked harder than him. I mean, he was the child who would never give up on anything, ever. But it's not. And so understand people will talk about, oh, a growth mindset. You know, absolutely. Do we need to believe that the brain can change? Do we need to believe that? Absolutely, we do. I believe it because we're created in God's image, and Christ holds all things together, and God is the giver of wisdom and knowledge. However, in a growth mindset, people forget that if you don't have the tools to actually process the information or to hold on to the steps to the math problem, it doesn't matter how much you believe. You know, someone may want to be a professional basketball player, but if they don't have the skills, they're not going to be able to do it as much as they may want to do it. So it's about equipping them with those cognitive skills. And I'll never forget, I was probably never more nervous about a presentation when I was asked to go to the University of Kentucky College of Medicine to their grand rounds for their child and adolescent psychiatrist. And I had 30 minutes to describe equipping minds. Okay, that's quite humorous. But Dr. Tom Miller showed up, the editor of the school violence book. He showed up that day because he was one of their professors. And they were all like, Dr. Miller, it's so good to see you. And he said, well, I'm here to hear Carol. And so it just like gave, even, I mean, they invited me, so there should be some credibility. I don't think they just like call people randomly, but after I'm doing everything and I'm showing them things, they said this, and this loops back to where I started. We know how to test it. You figured out how to train it and change it. And that was from just me showing, because you know what? Because of their background, because I showed them the Stroop effect and MBAC and multi-components and multitask switching and multi-domains. And I showed them in 30 minutes up there, like, just going as fast as I could with those cards. I didn't hit anybody, so it was good. But, but they know how important it is to test it. And every time y'all have a student or you've got a family with a student who's struggling, oh, go get them tested. Go get testing. Go get testing. And when I read the test, I want to rip them up. I really do. Because I go back to the back and it's just modification, accommodation, strategies, modifications, accommodations, strategies. Nothing about training. Nothing about increasing processing and working memory. And I had a beautiful, email, because one thing you'll hear, right, with students is, if y'all haven't seen the effects of social media, well, you've seen it, like physically seen it every day, that children's attention spans are getting less and less and less and less, right? Everybody is very, very aware of that. That's not telling you something you don't know. And Victoria was sharing some stats with me the other day. And so back in January, last week in January, when we had a horrible ice storm here, I was going to train Owensboro schools, and I still did. We just all did it from our homes, and they had their teacher books and student books and Equipping Minds cards. And so I got a report that I have to share with y'all, because I got this at the end of the school year. They started doing Equipping Minds in February. In April, the week of April 20th, they were doing their iReady test. And one of their fifth graders had gone up 77 points on her reading. She had gone up 2 grade levels. She had been stuck at the same grade level for 5 years. No movement for 5 years. They do Equipping Minds for 2 months, and it goes up 2 grade levels. But then they would send me pictures of the kids doing equipping minds in the school. And, but then I asked her, hey, I was really curious, were they also seeing, because I know it's going to generalize to academics, but I wanted to know, how is it impacting attention, self-regulation, and behavior? And she said, oh my goodness, we're not only seeing academic, but yes, in all of those areas. And she had a note from a teacher, and she said, hey, the teacher said, I just want to share some info that I didn't have when I turned in the data for my Equipping Minds kiddo. I collected her IEP progress monitoring data sheet from her teacher this week so I could work on progress reports. Her IEP was written at the end of January, and one of the skills she is working on is attending to task. According to the rubric data, she has recently achieved that part of her goal. She went from being able to attend to a teacher and learning on task for 2 minutes with frequent redirections to being able to attend to a teacher-led learning task for 5 to 10 minutes with age-appropriate redirection. I thought that was really exciting. Wow. So 2 minutes with a little bit of craziness going on to 5 to 10 with age-appropriate redirection. Y'all, this isn't a pill. Okay. We did not, no, it was training the brain for her brain to be able to do that. So while I love seeing those reading scores go up, I also, because if you can't attend, I mean, Comenius, John Milton Gregory, anything you ever hear, you can't teach anybody without their attention. And so to also see that. So to answer that big question, I hope we've done that in this intro today, just hitting on why should we even do this? So we will have schools put this in as a class, and they're going to be doing it in the high school down at Providence for 20 minutes every day. And then they've got it going on in their kindergarten through 2nd grade. It's a class. It just happens for all kindergarten. Well, they're pre-K to 2nd grade, and then in groups in 3rd through 6th grade and up. And then if somebody needs pulled individually. So, and then the way they're embedding. But I wanted to just hit on those so you all would know, because people are going to ask you. And the only reason I went back, y'all, I'll be 60 in a couple months, okay? And when I went back at 50, I'm like one of the oldest ones getting my doctorate. And I'm thinking, I just put my kids through college, right? I'm like, what am I doing? But it was for you. It was for our students. It was because people would say, well, where's your research? Are you published? Where's, I'm like, okay, I'll go do it. And so was very blessed to be able to do it here in Louisville at Southern Seminary. And what's exciting is just in this, this doesn't really have anything to do with school necessarily. One of them does, but there is an educator who she's here in Kentucky, but she did her doctorate at Dallas Theological, and she used Equipping Minds with senior adults. And they did it 2 hours a day at their church, 5 days a week. And one of the days they also took an hour, they were studying the book of Ephesians. And so they have seen really strong growth with those senior adults. And most of y'all know that we've got 2 senior medical centers, one in Indiana and one up in Cleveland, who use Equipping Minds with people with dementia. And at the same time, there's another person who is using Equipping Minds in her doctoral research with college students. And so we're very excited about that because mine was with 4th through 8th graders, but this will be a full-blown study with college students because very often students will get into college and they're just not ready. And they are struggling and they're not remembering what they're reading, and their ability to listen and take notes and to manage their time and to think and to make good decisions is a challenge area. So that's some other research that also has just come out and that is currently going on. And then there's another study that's probably happening, as Faith Behrens has told y'all, she'll be using it with dyslexia for her doctorate at Regents. So it's exciting when we've got you all, a lot of people I've trained who are taking it. All of these are people who went through the training and then God led them to go pursue doctoral work and use Equipping Minds where their hearts are. So it just continues. So you all, we all get to benefit from all that. And as Rose's mom said to me, and she said, Carol, if this can help Rose, what can it do for everybody?
Yeah.
Because she was told to have no expectations. And you may know that Rose graduated from high school with a regular diploma, completed algebra and geometry, and you can go on our YouTube channel and watch her presentation under the school. She presented her and Addison Page presented together at the 2022 conference. Okay.